Ladies and gentlemen, this is Joe Traina, and this is our 20th installment of my podcast. Please join me. Welcome. Today, I am thrilled to have a guest who has an extensive resume. He's had an illustrious career. Ken Bloom is with me. He is a New York-based, Grammy Award-winning theater historian, playwright, director, record producer, and author. He won the Grammy in 2017 for Best Album Notes for an album called Sissel and Blake Sing Shuffle Along. And I know a little bit about those fellows from my theater years, so we'll talk about them a little later, I hope. Ken began his career in the 70s at the New Playwrights Theater of Washington, and he co-produced and directed a series of musicals and musical reviews there by Tim Grunban, including Sirocco, Bride of Sirocco, Nightmare Out to Lunch, Eddie's Catchy Tunes, and he wrote and directed musical reviews. Cole Porter Revisited, The Unsung Jerome Kern, and Sweet and Hot, Songs of Harold Arlen. He hosted in Washington a musical theater radio show for WAMU-FM. That's the DC NPR station. And he continued that radio work in New York, 1980, as a correspondent for Morning Edition and All Things Considered. Ken Bloom, in partnership with Cleveland's Bill Rudman, founded Harbinger Records. And that is a company that's dedicated to the American popular song, musical theater, and cabaret. They've released, among other selections, Maxine Sullivan Sings the Great Songs of the Cotton Club by Harold Arlen and Ted Koehler, nominated for a Grammy, and did win the NARD Award for Best Jazz Vocal of the Year. Ken has also produced albums devoted to the talents of Mabel Mercer, Barbara Carroll, Mark Murphy. And they've released CDs on the legendary Walden Records series, recordings by Noel Coward, Charlie Strauss, and Lee Adams, Richard Rodgers, Jerry Herman, Sheldon Harnick, Cy Coleman, Tom Jones, and Harvey Schmidt. Ken is a noted author. His first book, American Song, The Complete Musical Theater Companion, is a listing of every song written for the American theater, which was named Reference Book of the Year by Choice Magazine. Moving on, in collaboration with Frank Vlasnik, Bloom wrote the bestseller Broadway Musicals, The 101 Greatest Shows of All Time, Sitcoms, The 101 Greatest Comedies of All Time, The American Songbook, The Singers and Songwriters and the Songs. I can't continue very much further because I want Ken to tell us a little bit more about his career, but he's also worked as a press agent and represented Cirque du Soleil, the Bolshoi, and the Kirov Ballets. Ken Bloom, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I did all that, huh?
Well, you live long enough and you have the opportunity and the talent, and that's what happens. Lucky for us.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
so how are you bearing up? How's it going for you right now?
I'm busy. I'm writing a complete lyrics of Sheldon Harnick book.
Great.
And producing a record of Naughty Marietta that the Smithsonian originally put out years ago. And other things. But on the other hand, I'm like in sort of another world. You know, I work and then I sit on the couch and I fall asleep and then I get up and I work. You know, it's very strange.
Well, we're leading parallel lives. Sounds like me too.
Yeah. So, I don't know. But the Sheldon Harnick book, he wrote over 1,000 songs. This is going to be the largest book in American history. I mean, he wrote from the Army in 1943. He's now 95, right. And he only stopped writing maybe 5 years ago or 6 years ago. He never stopped, to his credit.
Yeah, I've met him a few times. He's a lovely man.
He's a very nice guy. He has an ego like everybody has an ego, but he's very approachable, really a nice guy. He's been fantastic to work with, and he never threw out anything. He has every lyric for every song he ever wrote, and he has lyrics that he's adapted, like Sunrise Sunset. A lot of people want to use it for weddings, so he rewrote the lyrics so it would be appropriate for weddings, and then a pastor said to him, well, I'm doing a gay wedding. Can you change it for that. He changed it for that. Then someone else said, oh, I'm doing a wedding for two lesbians. He changed the lyrics for that. He's very adaptable. He wants his stuff, heard, and he's been great to work with.
So where are you in the writing of the book?
I'm in the final stretch. Right now I have to get the permission from all the publishers. But to find out all the publishers for 1,000 songs takes a long time. So that's where I am. And
working alone? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're working alone on that? Oh boy.
Oh yeah. Typing lyrics. But he's great, as I said. So, and we just had this Eubie Blake book come out. So we're doing all the press because, as you know, book publishers don't do press for you anymore. So, hence me talking to you.
How do you like doing the press? Do you enjoy it at all? You've been a press agent.
Yeah, I've been a press agent, so I know what to do. And this year is the centenary of Shuffle Along in May.
Right.
So that's helped a lot. So we have the Smithsonian's African American Museum is going to do a thing with us. Maryland Historical Society is going to do a program with us. I wrote it with the same guy I wrote the liner notes with, Richard Carlin. Once we wrote the liner notes and won the Grammy, how hard could it be to write a complete book? So 3 years later, the book is out, and now because of the centenary, we've been getting a lot of press, which is interesting.
Now, a lot of folks out there may not know about these guys. They had a very unusual careers and also groundbreaking in what they did, and this show in particular, if I'm not mistaken. You want to talk about it a little bit? Yeah,
so Shuffle Along premiered in 1921. There had been black shows on Broadway, mainly in the teens, and then they sort of went out of favor. And Shuffle Along came into town, completely unheralded. They gave them a theater at 63rd Street, which is way north of the theater district. It was an old lecture hall. They actually had to take the boxes out of the theater to make room for the orchestra pit. And it was an instant success. It had a great song, I'm Just Wild About Harry, that became a standard, and other big songs. And it was so successful, they had to change 63rd Street to a one-way street because of all the traffic. And Shuffle Along was also historic because it was the first time that a black couple on stage sang a legitimate love song to each other. And the company and the producers were really nervous to whether the white Broadway public would accept seeing a black couple sing a real love song without cliches and all. It also introduced the chorus line to Broadway. The reason being that because it was a lecture hall, there was no depth to the stage, so all the dancing had to be on a line. It introduced jazz to Broadway, and it was also the first show with an integrated audience. At first, the white audience sat in the orchestra and the black audience sat upstairs, and then little by little, they introduced black people sitting next to white people in the orchestra, which, believe it or not, was shocking for the day. And so Shuffle Along was a big deal. It was the 10th longest running musical of the 1920s, which is an impressive achievement given that Showboat was in the 1920s. And it also was the first show that was jazz. Before that, you had Victor Herbert and Rudolf Frimmel, and all these operetta people, but you had no jazz. And you can imagine how shocking this was to especially white audiences who really didn't even know jazz and the spirit and the energy in the show. So it was a good subject to write upon.
Now, it established Noble Sissel and Eubie Blake, I imagine.
Right. Yes, it did.
And they had a bit of a bank book, I suppose, because of this show.
Oh, yeah. They were very wealthy.
So what's that? For the time.
For the time.
Well, they made a lot of money. That, from what I've read, the show did very well.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They had the luxury of going forward and doing, in a way, what they wanted to do. So what did they do, those guys, after that?
So they did another edition of Shuffle Along in the 1930s. And Eubie Blake, believe it or not, was hired to write the music for a show called Elsie that was an all-white show. And so he was the first black composer hired to write for a white show, not a jazz show, a regular musical comedy. It wasn't a success, but he broke that barrier down. And they traveled all over the world with Shuffle Along and all over the country for years. Unfortunately, the Second World War came along, and that stopped everything. They both went overseas and entertained the troops. They came back to a Broadway that was very different than what they knew. They tried to do a Shuffle Along of 1952. It was not a hit. But Eubie Blake had a second career in the 80s when he was rediscovered with the ragtime craze, and he became a big celebrity. And he performed at the Kennedy Center. He had TV specials. There was a Broadway show titled Eubie. There was a musical review of his stuff. So he went out on top. He celebrated his 100th birthday, so the legend goes, but he actually fudged on his real birthday. He was about 95 when he died. But he was a fantastic guy, and he had a lot of influence with a lot of young composers in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s who wanted to know about ragtime and incorporate that into their music also.
Well, I remember the show. Did you know him?
No, I never met him. I saw him perform he would be at the Newport Jazz Festival, he was into his 90s, he was performing.
Sure.
You know. So he was fantastic. And Noble Sissel went on to write with Andy Razaf and had a successful career as a songwriter. So they did okay, but it was tough going because they were black and they weren't given the opportunities that, for example, at the end of the 20s, when sound movies came in, Rodgers and Hart and Jerome Kern and all these composers were asked to come to Hollywood to write for movie musicals. Well, Eubie Blake did not. Fats Waller was not asked. Even though Fats Waller was one of the biggest songwriters of the 20s, they were not asked to do anything in Hollywood. So there was still that racial thing.
Sure, sign of the times. And
right.
Good that it changed. I remember when in the 80s, there were a great number of African-American shows on Broadway. And, there were a lot of dance shows. And right. there were shows that were built around certain composers, Jelly Roll Morton, of course. And I thought that was great. Black and Blue was a favorite of mine.
Oh, it was great. That was really great. Yep.
Now, you want to talk about Harbinger Records? I would hope you would.
So Harbinger Records was founded by Bill Rudman and myself, sort of on a fluke. I was a press agent for New Playwrights Theater, and Bill Rudman was a press agent for a theater group, and we met on a conference, and we got along, and we said, well, we should start a record company, knowing nothing about doing record companies. So we had our first release was Geraldine Fitzgerald's one-woman show, Street Songs. And Bill had a cassette recorded of a live performance. Unfortunately, the cassette was recorded on the wrong side of the tape, but we were able to do it. And actually, we got a front page Arts and Leisure review from John Wilson in the Sunday New York Times theater section. It was amazing. And then the second album we did was Maxine Sullivan singing songs of the Cotton Club, where she appeared with Louis Armstrong late in the Cotton Club's life. And that got a Grammy nomination, as you said, and got some awards. And we thought, well, so easy. So we've done about 74 CDs since then. As you mentioned, Peggy Lee, which she was great, very interesting, but very great. Very easy to work with, but she was Peggy Lee, and a lot of artists and a lot of reissues of things. So it's been a very successful CD company. However, I'm now doing a CD of the Smithsonian's Naughty Marietta, and that will be my last CD with Harbinger Records after, I don't know, 30-something years. So I'm gonna start a new record company.
Okay. So you've been able to maybe even better than eke out a living or part of a living.
Yeah,
producing records. I've done a few, and when you do them yourself, of course, the way I like to do them, they're not really money-making ventures. I think of them sometimes as vanity projects, but it's also a musical calling card. And I have gotten work, which is nice, from presenting my CD and saying this is what we do. But tell us about the new venture.
Well, I don't quite know, but I have a lot of material I could release. I have a duplex in my basement. There's a lot of recordings we could release. A lot of the Harbinger recordings came from stuff I already had. For example, we were the first label to put out backers auditions of Broadway shows sung by the composers.
Aha.
So we did All American, Strauss and Adams.
Yes.
You know, and a lot of others. And surprisingly, they're big sellers for the people who are interested in that kind of thing. And we would sell about 1,000 to 1,500 of those niche recordings. And then others, like Peggy Lee and Maxine Sullivan, we'd sell many more. And we've had a few CDs that were not great, you know, with new artists. But we had a pretty good track record. And considering we never had any money, really, we never got paid for any of our stuff. We always put everything back into the record company. And Bill had a job with Great Lakes Theater Festival and then a group called Musical Theater Project, and I was doing books and, you know, other stuff. So that's where our money came from. This was like, I don't know, I don't want to say a vanity production, but we did this because we were interested in it and wanted to get the music out.
Sure. Yeah, a little bit of different kind of motivation for you. And one of the things I want to ask you is talking about CDs. I find they're kind of the musical equivalent of the buggy whip these days. People don't have the players. You still, they say, in what I try to do, it's good to have something physical to give to critics, to give to certainly radio stations. They like to have that. And it shows something that you've done that has artwork, etc. So do you see that you're going to be moving into things that are more digital, more online?
Yeah, I think the way to go, because, you know, it costs a lot to press a CD.
Right.
You know, and store the CDs. So I think what I would do is offer it digitally for download or streaming, and then CDs on demand. Because a certain age group, including mine, still want physical CDs, and you want the liner notes if you're really interested. So I think we can work it out without actually having to press CDs, which cost thousands of dollars and needs special artwork, and, you know, it's expensive.
Yeah, I love liner notes. I used to sit there and read records, the backs of records, the inside of records, the album covers, the sleeves, when I was listening, and I got to memorize those musicians.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Those songs. And yeah, that was a big deal for me.
Yep, me too. You know,
now you want to tell us a little bit about your books?
So my book, Broadway Musicals, The 101 Greatest Shows, was a big coffee table book. And I think we had a couple of hundred photos in it that had never been published before. We found photos rather, from the Daily News archive. And what happened is there's a company called Photo Fest, which is a photo house where you can rent photos. And the Daily News called them up and said, "We have thrown our photo archive into the dumpster. If you get here before the trash company comes, you can have it all." So they all went down there with boxes and saved all this stuff. And, you know, if you remember, the newspapers had color magazines every Sunday. And the Daily News took a lot of color photos of Broadway shows for the covers of those magazines. And so Frank and I found photos that no one else had ever seen because they weren't even used for the covers. They were just in the archive. And we also went to Lincoln Center, which has a huge photo archive of Broadway. And I think we must have gone through about I don't know, maybe 5,000 photos to choose the photos for these books. And although the books are very well written, but people bought it also for the photos, which really were spectacular. And, you know, so I did a series of books. I did an American song book about singers and songwriters, also a big coffee table book. Frank and I did a sitcom book, similarly about the 100 greatest sitcoms. You know, and I've written big reference books also. So it's a mishmash.
Now, listen, it's wonderful these things are documented, you know, and those topics have great interest out there in the world. Would you like to talk about your documentary, Merely Marvelous, The Dancing Genius of Gwen Verdon?
Yes, so a friend of mine, Chris Johnson, who's a filmmaker, and I were introduced to a man named Dennis Phil, who's now 91, and he loved Gwen Verdon. And he saw every one of her shows from the 1950s on. He was head of Squibb in Hong Kong when Sweet Charity opened, and he flew from Hong Kong to see the opening night of Sweet Charity, and the next day flew back to Hong Kong. That's how much he loved Gwen Verdon. So he came to me with just to meet me and all, and I gave him all this footage of Gwen Verdon in a lot of shows. And I said sort of offhandedly, well, we should do a documentary. So Chris had done a documentary. He's an actual filmmaker. And we blindly sort of made this documentary on Gwen Verdon. And we talked to Chita Rivera and John Kander, who wrote Chicago, and a lot of people who worked with her on stage. And we talked to her daughter, her son, and her nephew also. And we found tons of footage that no one had ever seen of Gwen, which was really great. And the movie has been a big success. We've been in, I think, 10 film festivals. We've won Best Film in a couple, runners-up in a couple, and it's still going strong. We have another 7 or 8 film festivals to go because the pandemic, a lot of film festivals didn't have them this year and moved them to next year. And we have a DVD that you can get through Amazon, or you can stream through Amazon, which is a good thing. And it's been a very successful film, considering I had never done a documentary before. And Dennis, who was a pharmaceutical, you know, in pharmaceuticals, he had never done it, but we were very successful with it. So we're now looking for another project. We'll see what happens.
Okay. Any thoughts on what you'd like to do next?
Well, I don't know. You know, I just wrote a friend who's part of the Onassis Foundation to think about them having us do a documentary on Melina Mercouri, who had a fantastic life, not only as a performer, but then she was in politics in Greece and was their cultural affairs minister. So I think it'd be really interesting. More interesting if they give us the money, of course. But we've had some ideas. We don't know. Penny Fuller, do you know Penny Fuller was a Broadway actress in a lot of shows? She did a one-woman show, a musical called 13 Things About Ed Carpellotti, and we're going to film that. And we'll start filming it probably in the fall.
Well, very good. You've done many, many things, as we can attest to. I want the listening audience out there to be aware of how to find you on the internet and how to purchase your books and your CDs. You mentioned that the documentary CD is available on Amazon. I would imagine your books are available there as well.
Correct. And the ones that are out of print, you can get on Abe Books.
Right.
So everything's available. And I think that's about the only real outlets. I mean, there's smaller outlets for the recordings. There's Amazon, of course, and then there's also Naxos, who's our distributor. They sell things, and there's other little record sites on the internet that you can get our recordings. But Amazon, as you know, is the big giant in town.
Sure.
Everybody goes there.
Indeed. Is there anything else you want to say about the future, what you hope to do? I know you're writing, and as you've said, but tell us what you have planned or you see yourself doing going forward.
Well, I'm going to be doing Sheldon's papers for Lincoln Center, getting them organized, which they pretty much are already. And I've done that with Peter Stone's papers, who wrote Charade and a lot of Broadway musicals,
Yep.
and Jerry Herman's papers, organized them for the Library of Congress. So I've done that also. So I think the moral of the story is, don't try to do things that you're not good at. And then you can be successful. Because I know a lot of people who want to be something, a writer or something, and they're not good at it, but still they persevere. And I think it's good just to do what you know you can do well, and be satisfied with that. So I hope most of the things I've done pretty well.
Well, it certainly sounds like it, and you've certainly received the attention, the accolades that I'm sure you richly deserve. I, of course, am a fan, and I'm well aware of your work, well acquainted with it. I'm so glad that our mutual friend David Conti, give him a little plug as a colleague, someone who is also an author, the theater management book, and someone who has his own producing ventures, his own producing interests, lovely man. And he actually appeared in a little film I made for my kids. So I really am happy to say he's one of my closest friends.
Yeah. Me too. He and Suzanne are fantastic.
Yes, they are.
They're really great.
Folks, I've been here with Ken Bloom, the gentleman who's had an illustrious career as an author, as a press agent, as a filmmaker, as an historian. I have to refer to my notes because he's a Grammy Award winner for CD Notes. He's a playwright, a record producer, and I hope that you'll check out Ken Bloom online. I hope you'll read his books. I hope that you'll purchase his recordings. Harbinger Records has put out probably dozens, I guess, of recordings, correct?
74.
74 recordings, folks. And I want to thank you, Ken, for making time today. It took a long time to get you here through no fault of anyone's. It just happened to be scheduling and where we were at the time. But right. I'm delighted to have had you.
Thanks very much. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
This is Joe Traina, ladies and gentlemen. We've been talking to Ken Bloom, and I appreciate you tuning in to Please Join Me. And I hope you will tune in again. I'll also check out our other podcasts, the other 19 that are available on Anchor FM, Radio Public, Breaker, and other platforms. Thank you very much. Everyone be well now.
You've been listening to Please Join Me with Joe Traina. Be sure to listen anywhere you get your podcasts. Keep up with joetrainamusic.com for news and new episodes. You can listen to Joe's latest recording, Tip of the Hat, on all major streaming services and wherever fine music is sold. This episode was produced by Caroline Voigt.